Drive. Phil's studio was packed that Thursday afternoon. The audience waited in silence, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Backstage, the 35-year-old men awaited their entrance, unaware that their lives were connected in a way that would defy all logic and morality. Michael Thompson, a corporate liar from Manhattan, wore an impeccable suit and carried in his eyes the confidence of someone who had always had it all. On the other side of the stage, Daniel Foster, a mechanic who had built his life in Detroit, nervously adjusted his flannel shirt, still processing the discovery that had brought him there. Between them, seated in the front row of guests, was Patricia Thompson, 68 years old, the woman whose secrets were about to implode before the national television cameras. The story began 3 months earlier when Daniel received the results of a recreational DNA test. He took out of curiosity. The algorithm not only mapped his origins, but identified a 100% genetic match with someone named Michael Thompson. The message was clear. He had an identical twin brother he never knew existed. Daniel, raised in foster homes and institutions within the Chicago system, always felt an inexplicable emptiness. Michael, on the other hand, grew up as an only child in a wealthy Connecticut family, never questioning his origins or identity. When the two men first met via video call, it was like looking into a mirror that reflected not only their physical appearance, but also their gestures, mannerisms, and even their tone of voice. The resemblance was unsettling and undeniable, but the discovery of the twins was just the tip of the iceberg. Upon investigating their birth certificates, they found contradictory records. Both were born in the same hospital, on the same day, at the same time. Michael was listed as the son of Patricia and Robert Thompson. Daniel appeared in hospital records as having been given up by Patricia Thompson for adoption, but all family ties were sealed and classified as confidential to days after his birth. Robert Thompson had died 15 years earlier, taking with him any explanation he could offer. Only Patricia remained, the woman who raised Michael in a 6-bedroom mansion while Daniel grew up in shared rooms with strangers. When confronted by her sons, Patricia initially denied everything. Later she admitted she knew of Daniel's existence, but claimed she had been forced to choose only one baby for medical reasons. The story didn't hold up. Desperate for answers, the siblings sought out the Dr. Phil show, hoping the pressure of the cameras would finally break Patricia's silence. Before we continue with this impactful story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of Dr. Phil's upcoming revelations. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what you think will happen in this case. Your opinion is very important for us to continue bringing you this exclusive content that transforms lives. The studio lights came on fully and Dr. Phil entered with his characteristic presence, greeting the audience before taking his central position. He held a thick envelope containing documents he had already reviewed backstage. His face was more serious than usual, and those who knew him well knew this would not be an ordinary episode. Today we have a story that challenges everything we think we know about family, choice, and morality. He began, his voice echoing through the studio. Michael and Daniel are identical twins who have lived 35 years without knowing of each other's existence. One grew up in a mansion, the other grew up in the foster care system, and their mother is here today to finally tell us why. Michael was the first to take the stage. He sat with an upright posture, the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege and opportunity. But his eyes betrayed something deeper, confusion, anger, and a growing sense that his entire identity might be built on a lie. Dr. Phil, all my life I believe I was an only child, Michael began, his voice controlled but tense. My parents always said my mother had complications during childbirth and couldn't have more children. I grew up in Connecticut, went to the best schools, went to Yale. My father left me a considerable inheritance when he died. I had everything. But 3 months ago, I found out I have a twin brother who grew up with nothing, and my mother knew about it all along. Daniel entered next, and the visual impact was immediate. The audience whispered, some covering their mouths with their hands. The two men were absolutely identical, from their hairline to the way they crossed their legs when sitting. Daniel, however, carried a different kind of toughness, the mark of someone who had fought for every achievement. I spent my childhood in 7 different foster homes, Daniel said, his voice choked with emotion. I was rejected 3 times by families who gave up on me. At 18, I was put on the streets. I learned mechanics working in a junkyard in Detroit. Today I have my own workshop there, but I built everything from scratch, without anyone. And all this time, I had a brother living like a prince less than 200 kilometers away, and a mother who chose to keep him and discard me like trash. Phil observed the two men, then turned his gaze to Patricia, who remained in the guest area. Patricia, would you like to come here and explain what happened? Patricia rose slowly, an elegant woman with perfectly styled gray hair, wearing an expensive tweed suit. She walked to the stage as if she were going to a trial, which, in a sense, was exactly what was happening. She sat in the chair between the two sons, refusing to make eye contact with either of them. I did what I had to do, Patricia began, her voice defensive. You don't understand what it was like in 1989. I was alone when I went into labor. Robert was away on business. The doctors didn't know it was twins until the second baby started to come out. I wasn't prepared. We didn't have the resources for the babies. Michael exploded. We didn't have resources? Mom, Dad owned 3 car dealerships. We lived in a mansion. Patricia closed her eyes. It wasn't about money, she whispered. It was about other things. Things you can't understand. Doctor. Phil leaned forward, his expression hardening. Patricia, are you telling me you had the financial resources, but still chose to give one of your newborn children up for adoption while keeping the other? I need you to explain to me what other things would justify that. Patricia remained silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost inaudible. Robert and I had problems. Serious problems. The marriage was falling apart. He had affairs. I found out I was pregnant and thought a baby could bring us back together. But when twins were born, I panicked. I thought I wouldn't be able to hold on to him if things got more complicated. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. So you abandoned me to save your marriage? That's the reason? Patricia looked at him for the first time, and there was something in her eyes that silenced the entire studio. I didn't abandon you because of the marriage, she said slowly. I gave you away because you weren't his. The studio erupted in murmurs. Michael went white. Daniel froze. Doctor. Phil raised his hand, demanding silence. Explain this, he demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. Patricia began to cry, but continued speaking. Robert and I were separated when I got pregnant. I had a brief relationship with another man. When I found out I was pregnant, I got back with Robert and told him the baby was his. But when the babies were born, I panicked. What if one of them wasn't Robert's? What if he found out? He would leave me with nothing. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything in my name. So I made a decision. Doctor. Phil was visibly disturbed. You gave a random baby up for adoption because you were afraid it might not be your husband's child. Patricia nodded, tears now flowing freely. I chose to keep Michael because he was born first. I told the doctors I couldn't care for the second baby for financial reasons. They arranged the adoption through official channels, but sealed all records to protect my identity. Back then, it was easier. I signed the papers and never looked back. Michael was breathing heavily, trying to process what he had just heard. So you raised me as daddy's boy, knowing I might not be? And you abandoned Daniel knowing he might be? Patricia shook her head violently. No, it wasn't like that. After Robert died, I secretly had a DNA test done using things of his that I had kept. The result confirmed that you were his son, Michael, which means that Daniel. She couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel finished for her, his voice breaking, which means that I'm Robert Thompson's son too. We're identical twins. Identical twins have to have the same father. You abandoned your own son, your husband's son, for nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know. I didn't know that identical twins couldn't have different fathers. I was young. I was scared. I had no one to advise me. When I found out the truth years later, it was too late. I tried to find you, Daniel, but the adoption records were sealed. I tried. I swear I tried. Doctor. Phil looked at Patricia with an expression that mixed disbelief and deep disappointment. But before he could answer, Patricia opened her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a yellowed envelope. There's something more, she said, her voice trembling. Something I've never told anyone. She held the envelope out to Phil. This is what really happened. Please read it, Doctor. Phil picked up the envelope and began to open it. As his eyes scanned the document inside, his expression changed completely. What began as confusion turned to shock, then to something close to horror. He read it once, then again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Finally, he looked at Patricia with an intensity that made even the cameraman recoil. "Are you telling me this is true?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Patricia nodded, unable to speak. Doctor. Phil stood abruptly, the document still in his hand. He walked to the center of the stage, then turned to the producers. "Stop the cameras," he said. When no one moved immediately, he raised his voice. "I said stop the cameras. Now." The cameras stopped rolling. The red transmission light went out. The audience was instructed to remain seated, but the murmur was impossible to contain. Doctor. Phil asked that all audience members be removed from the studio except for essential personnel. It took 15 minutes to clear the place. During all that time, Michael and Daniel remained seated, looking at each other with growing apprehension, while Patricia buried her face in her hands. When the studio was finally empty, Dr. Phil returned to the stage, holding the document as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "Patricia," he began, his voice controlled but trembling with restrained emotion. "This document is a trust fund deed that Robert Thompson updated in June 1989, just 3 weeks after the twins were born. The original version, created when you married, designated his fortune solely for you, Patricia, and future children in equal shares. But this updated version changed everything. It establishes a $3 million fund to be divided equally among all your biological children when they reach adulthood. But there is a clause here, added specifically in this 1989 version, that states that if any child is given up for adoption or otherwise removed from the custody of the Thompson family, all the money would revert to the remaining children in family custody." He looked at Patricia with penetrating intensity. "Did you know this when you gave Daniel up for adoption?" Patricia didn't answer, but guilt was etched on every line of her face. "Doctor," Phil continued, his voice growing harsher with each word, "Robert updated this trust fund 3 weeks after the babies were born. That means he knew he had twins when he made this update. And this clause about adoption wasn't in the previous version. Why would he add it specifically after the twins were born?" He paused dramatically. Unless he already knew you were considering giving one of the babies up for adoption and tried to prevent it financially. Patricia finally broke down. "Yes," she whispered. "Robert found out 2 weeks after the birth that I had filled out preliminary adoption forms for Daniel. We had a terrible fight. He told me that if I gave up our son, he would leave me penniless. So he updated the trust fund with that clause, thinking that the fear of losing the money would stop me." She wiped away tears. "But he didn't understand. I didn't just want the money. I wanted to make sure that my son, who stayed with me, would have everything. So I waited. I waited until Robert went back on his trip, finalized the adoption papers, and gave Daniel up. When Robert returned and found out, it was already done. The documents were signed. Daniel was gone. Robert was devastated. He wanted to undo everything, hire lawyers, but I told him it would be a scandal, that it would ruin his business reputation. Eventually, he gave up, but our marriage was never the same again. He barely spoke to me. And when that clause came into effect and Michael inherited the $3 million alone, at 18 years old, Robert was already dead and couldn't do anything. Michael was standing now, visibly trembling. "Mom, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't do it." But Patricia couldn't deny it. The evidence was there, in black and white, with her signature on the adoption papers dated just a week after Robert updated the trust fund. Daniel was in utter shock, unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal. "You sold me," he whispered. "You literally sold me for $1.5 million, and you destroyed your own marriage, ignored my father's attempts to save me, and made sure I received nothing." Doctor. Phil removed the microphone from his collar and placed it on the table, a gesture of such frustration that the entire staff snapped to attention. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his back to everyone, clearly struggling with his own emotions. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "In 22 years of doing this show, I've seen a lot. I've seen addiction, abuse, betrayal, lies. But never have I seen anything as calculatedly cruel as this. This woman not only abandoned her son against the express wishes of the child's father, she orchestrated a financial conspiracy that robbed him not only of a family, but also of his financial security, his education, his opportunities. She manipulated her own husband, destroyed their marriage, and did it knowing exactly what she was doing." He turned to Patricia. You destroyed the life of an innocent child out of greed. Robert tried to stop you. He literally changed his will to protect both his children. And you circumvented that, handing Daniel over before he could do anything more. You have no right to speak now. You had 35 years to tell the truth, 35 years to do the right thing, and you chose silence, Doctor. Phil then did something he had never done in the history of his show. He began walking backstage without his microphone, without saying anything more. A producer ran up to him, trying to understand what was happening. Phil, where are you going, Doctor? Phil stopped, looked back one last time at Patricia, Michael, and Daniel on stage, and simply said, I can't do this. I can't sit here and pretend this is just another episode. This is criminal. This needs to be investigated by the appropriate authorities, not exploited on national television. The crew panicked. Never before had Dr. Phil threatened to leave mid-recording. Producers gathered, whispering urgently. It was Michael who broke the deadlock. Dr. Phil, wait, he called, his voice breaking. Please don't go. We need to finish this. Not for television. For us. Doctor. Phil stopped, turned slowly. Michael continued, tears streaming down his face. All my life, I've had everything and thought I deserved it. But now I know that every opportunity, every privilege, every dollar was stolen from my brother. And my own father tried to stop it and was ignored. I can't change the past, but I can try to fix the future. And I need you to help me do it the right way. Doctor. Phil stood still for a long moment, clearly torn between his moral outrage and his commitment to helping the people who came to his show. Finally, he walked back to the stage. He picked up the microphone from the table and put it back on his collar, a gesture that signaled to the crew that he would stay. He sat directly on the floor between Michael and Daniel, a posture completely outside of protocol for the show. Do you understand that what happened here isn't just a family matter? It's a legal matter. Patricia could face charges of fraud, forgery, violation of adoption laws, and even disregarding the legal instructions of a trust fund. Michael, you may have to return half of the inheritance you received. Daniel, you have a legal right to redress, but the process will be painful and public. Daniel looked at his twin brother, the man who had lived the life that should have been his. Then, surprisingly, he reached out his hand. I don't want to destroy my family right after meeting her, he said. Am I angry? Am I devastated? Yes, but Michael wasn't to blame for this. He was deceived just as much as I was, and from what you're saying, my father tried to protect us. He tried to do the right thing. She's the one who betrayed everything. Michael took Daniel's hand, and the two brothers embraced for the first time in their lives, crying openly. Patricia tried to approach, but Dr. Phil raised his hand, stopping her. No, you don't have the right to be part of this moment. You robbed them of a lifetime of moments like this. And you betrayed your own husband who tried to do the right thing. Doctor. Phil finally stood up and signaled for the crew to turn the cameras back on. When the red light came on, he looked directly into the lens, his expression grave. You have just witnessed something I never thought I would see on this stage. A mother who consciously, deliberately destroyed her son's life out of financial greed, even circumventing her own husband's attempts to protect the children. And yes, I almost left this show today because there are limits to what can be turned into entertainment. Some stories are so dark that they challenge our ability to process them publicly. He paused, letting his words sink in. But I stayed because these two men, Michael and Daniel, deserve witnesses. They deserve for the world to see not only the crime committed against them, but also their courage in choosing forgiveness and reconciliation despite everything. Patricia Thompson conspired to deprive her son of a family, education, and financial security. She ignored her husband's legal attempts to protect both children. She kept this secret for decades, financially profiting from the misery she caused. And today, she has to face the consequences. Doctor. Phil looked at Patricia one last time. I strongly recommend you hire a criminal lawyer because after this episode airs, I will personally forward all the documentation to the district attorney. What you did is not only morally reprehensible, it's illegal. You defrauded a legally established trust fund. You violated the express instructions of these children's father, and you need to be held accountable. He then turned to Michael and Daniel. As for the two of you, I will connect you with the best family lawyers and estate lawyers I know. Michael, you will have to make difficult decisions about the inheritance you received. Daniel, you will have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want to have with the mother who abandoned you. But the most important thing you have now is each other. And you have the memory of a father who tried to do the right thing. Robert may not have been able to stop his wife, but he tried. That counts for something. The two men remained embraced, and Dr. Phil placed a hand on each of their shoulders. The truth is this, he continued, his voice softening only slightly. Family isn't just about biology or genetics. It's about choice. Patricia had the choice to love and protect both her children, and she chose money. Robert had the choice to accept or fight, and he chose to fight for his children, even if he didn't win. You now have the choice of how to move forward. You can choose bitterness and revenge, or you can choose to rebuild the relationship that was stolen from you. And based on what I've seen here today, I think you will choose the path of healing. The studio remained in absolute silence as Dr. Phil concluded. I threaten to quit today because there are times when the media, entertainment, and even talk shows need to recognize that some stories transcend the format. This isn't just content. These are real lives, real trauma, real crime. And my commitment has never been to ratings. It's to the people who trust me to help them find answers and paths to healing. He looked directly at the camera one last time. If you're watching this and you have secrets that are destroying your family, know that the truth always comes out. Always. And the longer you wait, the more devastating the impact. Patricia Thompson waited 35 years, and now she's lost everything. Her children, her reputation, and possibly her freedom. Dr. Phil signaled for the crew to stop recording. The cameras turned off, but he remained on stage with Michael and Daniel for over an hour, discussing off-camera the next practical and emotional steps. Patricia was escorted from the studio by security guards, alone and in tears. In the following months, she would face criminal charges related to adoption fraud, financial conspiracy, and breach of trust fund. Michael voluntarily decided to split his inheritance with Daniel, acknowledging that the money should always have belonged to both of them. The division wasn't simple. The original $3 million, inherited by Michael when he turned 18 in 2007, had been invested and managed over 17 years, growing to approximately $6 million by 2024. Michael, working with his lawyers, calculated that Daniel was entitled not only to half of the original $3 million, but also to half of all the growth that money would have generated if it had been invested since 2007. In the end, Michael transferred $3 million to Daniel, acknowledging all the years of return on investment his brother had missed. It was an act of justice and brotherly love that surprised even the most cynical lawyers. But more important than the money was the relationship the two brothers built. 6 months after the episode aired, Michael sold his mansion in Connecticut and bought two adjacent houses in a Massachusetts suburb, halfway between his old life in New York and the workshop Daniel had built in Detroit. Daniel decided to open a second workshop in Massachusetts, keeping the original one in Detroit under the management of his trusted partner, allowing him to split his time between the two states. Now the brothers live as neighbors with their respective families. Their children grow up together as cousins, sharing the childhood their parents never had. They created a foundation, in the name of the father they never really knew, Robert Thompson, dedicated to helping children in the foster care system find permanent homes and ensuring that sibling separations are prevented whenever possible. The foundation also offers free legal assistance in cases where trust fund instructions and wills are violated to the detriment of children. Patricia served 18 months in prison for document fraud, violation of adoption laws, and manipulation of trust funds. Upon her release, she attempted to contact her children, but both refused. Michael sent a letter explaining that they forgave her not because she deserved it, but for their own peace of mind, but that they could not have a relationship with someone who had deliberately caused so much harm and ignored her own husband's attempts to do the right thing. The last anyone heard from Patricia, she was living in a modest apartment in Arizona, working in a customer service center, her former life of privilege completely shattered by the choices she made decades ago. As for Dr. Phil, that episode became one of the most discussed of his entire career, not because it was sensational or scandalous, but because it exposed the ethical limits of television entertainment and the weight of responsibility that comes with public platforms. In later interviews, he said that moment of almost leaving the show forced him to reassess his role as a host. I realized that some stories require more than entertainment or even advice. They require justice. And sometimes, the most responsible thing we can do is stop filming and ensure that the appropriate authorities get involved. But I also learned that when the people involved genuinely want to heal and move on, our platform can powerfully witness that. The story of Michael and Daniel Thompson became a paradigmatic case about the dangers of greed, the destructive power of family secrets, and the extraordinary human capacity for forgiveness and rebuilding. Two men who should have grown up as best friends, sharing rooms and dreams, were separated by a mother who chose money over love and ignored her husband's attempts to protect them. But in the end, they found each other and built the family they always deserved. And Patricia? She now lives with the weight of her choices, a woman who traded the children for an inheritance, betrayed her husband who tried to do the right thing, and ended up losing absolutely everything. This is the brutal truth about family conspiracy. It doesn't just steal the present, it kidnaps the future. And when it's finally exposed, it leaves only wreckage where there should be love. Doctor Phil almost left the show that day because he understood that some truths are too heavy to be treated as entertainment. But he stayed to ensure that Michael and Daniel had witnesses to their courage, their choice to forgive, and their determination to reclaim the stolen years. Because in the end, it's not the conspiracy that defines us. It's how we respond when the truth finally comes to light. And in this case, two brothers chose love, justice, and reconciliation over revenge. That's the true story that deserved to be told.